Everybody, this is Dream, and today we got a nice 11 game slate here. Before I get started, can you guys please smash that subscribe button? That really helps, and like this video. Really appreciate everybody that subscribed and join the Discord and stuff like that. If you're not in Discord, make sure to look in the description and join that. Also, check out Patreon below and the description as well. And with that said, let's go ahead and get into the players that I like here. All right, so my top picks here for stacks are going to be Texas, LA Angels, Minnesota, Atlanta, and San Francisco, with a little bit of a twist on the Chicago White Sox as well. There's a few guys on the White Sox that look really good. You can pretty much stack anybody from San Francisco and Atlanta. You could start anybody in the starting five for Minnesota. Then for the Angels, you're looking at like a Trout, Otani, Rengifo, or Ward stack. Maybe a three-player stack out of those four. And then for Texas, maybe the starting four, and then Jung, and then maybe Bubba Thompson or Matthias, depending on who starts at the 9 hole. But that said, I think we got some really good options from that perspective. And then from the pitching perspective, we have a lot of good options as well. So let's go ahead and start with Dylan Case. Dylan Case is the pitcher for the White Sox. Now, in his games, in his last 6 games, 3 of them he hasn't scored particularly well. And so you do need to be aware of that. But in 3 games against Cleveland this year, he's got 29, 20, and 4 fantasy points. I don't know that he's a super lock on DraftKings. He's a little bit safer on FanDuel because you get more upside from the strikeouts and you get limited from the runs scored. I don't love him in this matchup, but I still think he's in a pretty good spot. And, he's averaging 18 fantasy points a game to Cleveland, basically. He's just not getting enough strikeouts necessarily, right around 5 a game against them, which isn't quite enough. He usually does a little bit better than that, too, against most teams. But he's still somebody to consider on the slate. Then we have Carrasco for the Mets against Milwaukee. Now, obviously, Milwaukee's a pretty decent team. He hasn't faced them yet, but he has been pitching pretty well, 18 fantasy points a game, last 10. Now, in his last, excuse me, the problem with him is that he has a lot of games where he either does really bad or he does really good, and so you'll see here on the games he's got 33, 25, 3, -3, 28, 20, 31, 8, 25. Yeah, so you can see what I'm saying. He's very inconsistent, and he really isn't getting enough strikeouts in the inconsistent games where he makes it worthwhile, so it's just a very risky situation. The next guy I'm going to talk about is going to be, where'd he go? Is going to be Nestor Cortez for the New York Yankees. Now, he's averaging 17 fantasy points a game, last 10. Now, here's the thing about him. He's been pretty inconsistent this season, but it's a really plus matchup against Pittsburgh, and so that gives him an advantage. He doesn't really get the strikeouts that we want a lot of times, so that does hurt him a little bit, but Pittsburgh is not playing well, so he's somebody to consider simply because of that. But I still think that he's probably not the most ideal situation here. And apparently, as I was trying to find Carlos Rodon, apparently maybe he's not going to be starting for the San Francisco tomorrow, and it's actually going to be Baribiba. If that's the case, then we are going to probably going to have to change up and load up some Colorado Rockies again. I was thinking originally the plan, from what I was seeing, is that it was going to be Rodon, and if it's Rodon, then obviously you don't really want to use Colorado players, but if it's Breida, then that really opens up the possibility for the Colorado Rockies. So we'll see how that is as we get closer to the slate itself. Luis Castillo is a guy I really like here against Oakland. Now, he's had 1 game against Oakland, and it was really bad, 7.3 fantasy points, but every other game has been super solid, over 20 fantasy points since the middle of 6/22, where he scored 9 points. Every game since that, with the exception of the Oakland game, he's been 19.2 or better, with several 30-point games as well. So I think he's in a great spot, and I think he's somebody to take a look at and probably use on DraftKings, especially as one of your 2 pitchers. Plus, he's not that expensive at $9,100. Makes him a little bit cheaper, which is unusual for guys in his situation. And then finally, the final pitcher I'm going to mention is Charlie Morton. He's in a great spot against Washington, who he's been really good against this season the one time. and he gets enough strikeouts, even though he does have some shakiness in his like game to game. He does get enough strikeouts where he should feel pretty safe in this particular matchup, just because it's the Washington. But he's not the most ideal situation because he's kind of hit or miss sometimes. He might end up having a bad game, and that would suck. With that said, I think it's a really solid situation for most of these pitchers. We got Milwaukee having a opener as well, so we'll see who they have as their starter, as their second pitcher as well. But overall, I think we have a pretty good set of options. Let me look at the Colorado lineup real quick and tell you who I like in that, assuming that it's Barriba and not Rodon. It seems like that's uncertain at this point, so I'm just going to kind of go through and show you the guys to take a look at if it is Barriba and then some other like low-end San Francisco pitcher. So obviously at first base, we're going to look at Toglia and Monterio. Both of them are in great spots, as well as CJ Cron for that matter. All three of them are in great spots for this particular game, if that's who plays. And then Ryan McMahon, he's actually one of the safest players at his position at home against teams. And then at third base, well, we've already covered those two guys. Alan Trejo for at shortstop is a great option. And then also at outfielder, Toglia, who I already mentioned, and Daza are probably the top guys that I would consider if it is really not Rodon. So I'm just adding that in because I didn't include them in the list of players because I thought that it was going to be Rodon, and there wouldn't be much use. You wouldn't want to risk a lot of those guys against Rodon. So with that said, let's go and get into the catchers themselves. So first of all, we have William Contreras for the Braves, and then Travis d'Arnaud. Both these guys are in great spots against Corbin, and either one of them is going to start. Sometimes both of them start, and if that's the case, then you just have to. I usually go with d'Arnaud just because he's a little bit less expensive, but they're both in great spots. Carson Kelly's in a really great spot here against the LA Dodgers. Now, he hadn't been hitting the ball quite as well lately, but he's still got potential in this matchup. He had a really good game yesterday, and I look for him to continue that. MJ Melendez for Kansas City is in a great matchup against Bundy, and you could also put in Salvador Perez, and then Will Smith and Austin Barnes for the Dodgers. If Austin Barnes plays, he's definitely going to be my top option, but if Will Smith is the starter, then I'll probably look at Contreras or d'Arnaud or MJ Melendez. Obviously, Will Smith's good, but he is a little inconsistent sometimes. But if we look at Austin Barnes, he's averaging 8.9, 2 home runs in the last 10, 324 batting average, so he's in a great spot. At first base, I have Luke Voit for Washington against Atlanta. He's 8.5 fantasy points a game in the last 10. Now, he has a little bit of a tough matchup, but I still think he's been hitting the ball well enough that he can do something here. And one of my favorite options here is Carlos Santana, who's just too inexpensive at $2,800. He's averaging 12.8 fantasy points the last 10, including 7 home runs. He's having some absolute mammoth of games. He's a little bit more bust, but I think his price is too cheap. And then Miranda for Minnesota. These Minnesota guys look really solid. His fantasy points a game isn't necessarily all that great, but he's getting games where he's getting 8 and 10 points, and we like that about that with him. And Luis Arias has actually been playing quite a bit better, averaging 375 the last 10. Don't be confused by his per game 6.2. It's actually higher than that, just because in 3 of the last 10 games he's been pinch hitting, so that does late in the game, so that offsets some points. So don't take that too. He's in a great spot here. Ryan Mountcastle is a guy I really like against Detroit. He's hitting the ball pretty well. 6.3 last 10, including a home run. He's kind of due for another one, I think, and he's been getting some points each game. And then Nate Lowe for Texas against Sandoval. He's in a great spot here. He's hitting 333 the last 10, and he's just been hitting the ball extremely well as of late. He's just a good hitter, generally speaking. And then for second base, I have Massey for Kansas City. I really like Kansas City against Bundy. He's in a good spot. He's not a big home run hitter, but he can get base hits and stuff, and that's what we're going to need him to do in this matchup. And then we have Thairo Estrada for San Francisco. Obviously, they're going against Kyle Freeland, who's a guy that you like to get guys against. So he's going to be in a great spot here. I wish his price was a little bit lower, but I still think he's in a top tier spot. Then we'll look at Nick Gordon for Minnesota. He is hitting the ball extremely well. 313, 8.7 fantasy points a game, 3 home runs, and the next over the last 10. And so he's in a great spot in that matchup. And then Wilmer Flores for San Francisco, another guy that's in a great spot. Now he had a really good game yesterday, but against San Francisco or against Colorado doesn't show up here. But he should have another good game against Freeland. And then Grissom for Atlanta, he's now playing second base the rest of the year. This is just a beautiful matchup for him, and so hopefully he can get some hits. And then Marcus Semien for Texas against the Angels. He is in a great spot here, hitting 364, 11.6 the last 10, including a couple home runs and a triple. I really think he's in a great spot here as well. At third base, Josh Jung is one of my top options for Texas against Sandoval. He's hitting the ball extremely well, 8.2 the last 10 games, including 3 home runs, and he's played 10 games. So he's hitting really pretty solid. He does get strikeouts, but he's still hitting the ball well, and so I think he's somebody you have to consider at a pretty minimum price. And then Gio Urshela for Minnesota is in a great spot here. 7.7 fantasy points a game, 343 last 10 with a home run. Then I also like Luis Rengifo for the Angels against Texas. He's one of the few guys on the Angels that are hitting the ball extremely well lately. 282, 10 fantasy points a game with a bunch of home runs. Really playing extremely well. So I think he's somebody you have to consider. And then Bobby Witt's in a great spot against Bundy. Obviously, some of the Kansas City guys are pretty expensive, but like he is. But he's home run threat, and he's kind of due for one. Then we look at Eduardo Escobar for the Mets, who are in a great matchup against Ashby. He's been killing the ball, 342 last 10 with 3 home runs. Just having really great games, game to game to game. And then if we go ahead to get to shortstop, I'm actually going to, I think we have several good options here. Brandon Crawford is the first guy who's for San Francisco against Freeland. He's done pretty good against Colorado this year, 8 fantasy points a game, and he's got home run potential in this particular matchup because it's at Colorado. Dylan Moore for the Seattle is in a great spot here against Oakland. He's averaging 7 fantasy points a game, and he's hitting 368 in those games, so I think he's in a really good spot. Same for Corey Seager, who hasn't been hitting quite as well, but he's still getting the fantasy points we need, and he's a little bit boomer bust lately, but he's still in a great spot here against Angels. And then we'll look at Javier Baez. I actually liked him a lot yesterday, and he's in another good matchup against Baltimore here. He's really started to hit the ball well, 375 the last 10. Then we're going to look at Elvis Andrus for the Chicago White Sox, and he's averaging 14.2 fantasy points a game, 364. His price has come up some on DraftKings, but he's still playable, and so I think he's in a great spot. And then, of course, the guys from the Colorado Rockies, if it really isn't Rodon. So then we'll go ahead and look in the outfielder situation. First, we have Stone Garrett, who didn't do well yesterday, but he's in a better matchup today. Doesn't have to deal with Kershaw. Again, he's hitting 17 fantasy points a game for the last on the away games on this trip, and so he's hitting the ball really well. If he does start, he's somebody I would definitely consider because he's got home run potential, and he's going to have an easier matchup than he did yesterday. Robbie Grossman for Atlanta is in a great spot against Corbin. He's averaging almost 10 fantasy points a game the last 10 games. He's really starting to hit the ball well, and I think he's in a solid place. And this is a type of matchup where he can really hit a home run. Ronald Acuna, and then also Michael Harris for Atlanta, both in great spots here. Both hitting the ball really well as of late, and have lots of upside in this particular matchup. Really like both of those guys in this situation. Then we have Taylor Ward for Angels. He's in a great spot. He's averaging 371 the last 10 with a home run. He's a home run threat too, just like Trout is. And I think in this particular matchup, I mean, not just like Trout, but he's comparable to other outfielders like Robbie Grossman and Pollock and stuff like that. He can hit the home run, so I think he's in a great spot for this plus matchup. Then we look at AJ Pollock for the White Sox, hitting 263 with a home run last 10 games. I really like what he's doing. I also like Yelich and McCutchen for Milwaukee against Carrasco. I think they're in a great spot where they can continue to hit the ball well, which they've been hitting extremely well. Yelich is 8.2 the last 10, but he's kind of due for a home run, so I think he can probably hit one here. And McCutchen, let's see if we can find him. He's hitting only 167, but still getting 7 fantasy points a game, and he can hit a home run in this game as well. Another guy I really like is Aldis Garcia for Texas. 303, 10.9 with 3 home runs and a triple the last 10 games. And then, obviously, Aaron Judge is somebody you have to take a look at in this plus matchup against Pittsburgh, who's literally hitting 500 for the last 10 games. He's getting walked a lot. He even got a steal in one game. He's getting home runs. He's somebody to consider as his Mr. Trout. And this nice big old plus matchup for the Angels against Texas. So, overall, I think we have a really solid slate. Obviously, the San Francisco-Colorado game's throwing a little bit of craziness in the loop here. I'm going to go through those players one more time for both teams, just because this game, if it really is Brevia now and some other guy, which we don't know who it is yet, depending on what the line is on the game. So, yeah, like yesterday, the line was almost 13 points, I believe, or runs rather. So, I really think that this is a game that you have to consider stacking both ways. I did that yesterday, and it really paid off. And literally every player on the team, both teams got a hit except for one, and everybody scored some fantasy points. And so you're gonna have to take a look at some of these guys. Not anybody at catcher really, but C.J. Cron, Talagia, Montero, and then Villar for San Francisco would be somebody to consider as well if he plays. And then for second base, we have McMahon and Flores and Estrada as somebody to take a look at. And then at third base, you're looking at McMahon, Montero, and maybe Villar. And then at shortstop, Tragio and Crawford. And then at outfielders, we're looking at Jock Peterson, Estrada, Taglia, and Daza are going to be your top options. Now, obviously, this changes slightly if those are not the guys that actually end up starting, but those are the guys that are likely to start in this game, so I think those are going to be the guys that you want to take a look at and try to stack with those players. With that said, I think we have a really good slate. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you don't mind. Make sure to check out Discord if you haven't checked that out yet, and have a nice day, guys.